Hey everybody, Jeff Romo here. You've heard me on Game Store Profits. You've seen me on InnRoads Plays. I'm with InnRoads Ministries and I am here to introduce the first event in our Summer One-Shots series. Dungeon World. It's that thing that is not what you're thinking, but if you're a role-playing game player, then yeah, it's exactly what you're thinking. It is a game system designed by Sage Latour and Adam Koebel and is based on the Apocalypse World engine. It's highly improvised and focuses on a shared storytelling experience where the mechanics of the system, as few as they are, feed the narrative. They feeds the fiction, whereas versus the fiction feeding the mechanics. What the heck does that mean? A bunch of fancy words, blah, 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 blah. Well, you'll find me asking a lot of questions during gameplay. That will start right with character creation and weave its way into the actual game itself and this shared narrative that we're going to be putting together. I kind of think of it like I'm the game master, but I've got a bunch of little game masters around me as well. They're going to be just as important to the story as I am. I've got a little thread that I'm going to run. I'm going to weave that little sucker right through the story, but you know what? It's going to be fleshed out by the players. So here's an example. I ran a game about 2, 3, 4, well, as of the time this drops, about a month ago, where a group of players entered into a local tavern. They already knew each other. They had a shared history, and we'll get to that when it comes to character creation. They entered a tavern, and I asked them, I said, what about this tavern? You've been here before. This place is almost like a second or third or fifth home to you. You do business, you meet people. What about this tavern stands out to you? And I got some interesting answers. One player said, there's a fighting ring right in the middle of the tavern. So you have a common room, and then there's a fighting ring right in that common room. So it's like Fight Club, but not in the basement. And I said, well, why is that so important to you? And the character said, well, you know what? I used to perform in a circus, a traveling menagerie. And so being in the spot like that, performing, even if these are true blue fights, but they are bet upon, they are wagered upon, I feel them to be what connects me to this tavern because of my history. I was like, great, that's awesome. It's in the book. It's in this story that we're telling. It's going to be part of this tavern. The other guy comes up and says, well, you know what? I haven't been a lot of places. This town where we're at, this has been my home forever and a day. But when I come into this tavern, I see this wall behind the bar of alcohol, just bottles and bottles and casks and everything you could possibly find. And it reminds me that I am like a speck of sand on the beach. I am not very large in this world, and there's a lot of this world that I have not seen. So, boom, that made me think that the owner of this tavern is well-traveled. They actually personally send people, or he himself goes out and finds these beverages, these drinks, the food, that sort of thing, and brings them in. And in fact, as we were telling the story, we thought, you know what? In those travels, he goes and he finds some of the best fighters and persuades them to come to town and to fight in his tavern. So that's kind of what it's like to build a story in Dungeon World. I kind of think of it that when you're not fighting, you're actually still having a lot of interaction, a lot of fun in this story. And believe me, I do enjoy a good fight when it comes to a good role-playing game. But another remark from one of those players was that we just went through a 3-hour session and we didn't have a single fight. And I still had a hell of a lot of fun. There was some dice rolling, there was some chance, there was some risks that were going on, there was some folks that got hurt, even though it wasn't a mass fight. But it kind of speaks towards the fun that Dungeon World can provide for you, and these styles of games that are driven more by the story than they are by the dice. So let's go real quick through gameplay mechanics and character creation. We'll kind of do it simultaneously, if you will. So first off, let's take a look at the beginnings of character creation. You are going to be choosing a class. Through some of the third-party distributors, there's a bevy of classes to choose from, but I'm going to be working strictly from the core rulebook for this one-shot, just to keep it simple. So you have your basic characters, and if you've played Dungeons and Dragons, or you've even sampled it a bit, or seen Lord of the Rings, whatever, you'll be kind of familiar with these classes. You have your fighter, you have your wizard, your cleric, your thief, your ranger, and your paladin. There's also a couple of others that are pretty familiar to the Dungeons and Dragons crowd, called the barbarian and the druid. The interesting thing with these guys is that the barbarian is not just an engine of destruction. They are, in fact, somebody who is considered an outsider. They're powered by desire. Yes, there's that drive towards a particular goal. You could have your standard Conan character who's been, stolen from his village, parents killed, and sold into slavery, only to come back with a vengeance against the people that wronged him. But there's also those where, let's say you were part of a particular guild and you were outcast, and it caused you to become a social outcast. Perhaps there's something about you that separates you from society, but yet there's a passion that gets built up behind that. So it makes the barbarian a little bit more of an interesting character. You still have some of your smashy, shouty powers, but at the same time, it has kind of a slightly layered focus to it. The druid, definitely tied to nature, definitely one with the trees and the earth and the animals, but their main focus is the ability to shapeshift. You have this ability pretty early on in the game creation, or character creation, and that shape-shifting also lends itself towards personality shifting as well. Not so much that your entire personalities, but maybe you spent your time as a wolf for quite a bit of time, and when you come out of it, you are a little bit more wary. You're a little bit more keen when it comes to senses. You're a little bit more laser focused. Maybe if you were a sloth, to be random, you're a little bit slower, you're a little bit more lazy, you're a little bit more efficient at metabolizing things, that sort of thing. So there's your barbarian, your druid. There's another class that's interesting I'll have thrown in there called the immolator, and it is exactly as it sounds. It does deal with fire, but it has to deal with sacrifice in order to gain these particular powers that the immolator possesses. One of the characters in that aforementioned game is an immolator, and some of the things that they sacrifice are not just the physical attributes, but they're also connections to the world. They had to give up their connection to this traveling menagerie, this circus, that they loved to be a part of, however, knew that they had to depart it. They had to leave the comfort of that circus to gain more power. So that was a big sacrifice for them, and that graduated them into kind of a level 1 or a tier 1 character. And then later on, they tried to use their power, and they had to sacrifice their voice in order to make this particular instance happen. It was a minor effect, so they only lost their voice for a few hours, but it's the idea that you need to kind of gauge what you're giving up in order to see what you get. And it's all driven by the story. Love it. So that's character creation. As far as choosing classes, you're going to be able to choose your race. Races are driven a little bit off of what the character classes are. For instance, I'll show you the bard. The bard has the choice of an elf or a human. You could make the argument for being something else like a dwarf, that sort of thing. I'm looking right at you, Mr. Perna. So we could definitely work with that, but the way the game is geared, it gives them certain patterns. So like paladins are primarily human, that sort of thing. So that's another part of the character creation. You want to choose your name. They have a bunch of names that are available within the book itself. If you have one yourself, use it, no problem. You have a look to choose from. This is kind of interesting. So let's jump over to the look section up here on the character sheet. And let me blow this up a little bit. So for the bard, they have a fit, well-fed, thin. You can choose those. Eyes are knowing, they're fiery, or they're joyous, you're super happy. You have fancy hair, wild hair, a stylish cap, finery, traveling, poor, whatever the clothes are. And these are, these are going to be little things that are going to tell your character apart or set your character apart, but I'm also going to probably ask you why you chose that. Where did you get that stylish cap? Is it your father's? Is it handed down by your mentor and his mentor before him and his mentor before them? So how does that impact your character in the world? So you choose your stats. Again, basic stats. You have your strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. They give you a set of points to go through and use. So those can be your default, and then you can place them where you need them according to the type of character that you're playing, or you can roll 3d6 and put those stats into each of the box abilities as you roll. Then you have your modifiers, that sort of thing. One thing I wanted to focus on a little briefly is the maximum HP. HP is interesting in that it is set at level 1. Your maximum HP is going to be equal to your class's base HP, along with any constitution modifiers. That's your maximum. Now that can be improved as you go up in levels. Each level that you raise, you're going to be able to raise an ability score. And if you raise constitution, that's going to give you more hit points. So it makes Dungeon World a little bit more lethal. It can be. But at the same time, as a game master, it's my responsibility to make sure that I'm not throwing, a Tarrasque at a bunch of first or second level characters that aren't going to be able to have the moves and abilities to avoid that danger. Starting moves. This is something that's kind of interesting about Dungeon World. A lot of times you'll have a list of skills and then feats that enhance those skills within your particular game systems. Dungeon World, Dungeons and Dragons, Pathfinder comes to mind. But with Dungeon World, they've simplified this. Again, it owes to the Apocalypse World engine, but in this case here, for the fantasy setting, you have hack and slash, that's all your melee attacks, your punchies, volley, throwing knives, rocks, arrows, whatever. Parlay is when you have something over an NPC and you're trying to discuss something with them and get them to do something that you want. Defy danger is avoiding notice, avoiding getting struck, a quick thinking type of scenario. Those can be modified. All of these roles can be modified by your ability scores, and then also could be modified by other things like bonds. And we'll talk about bonds in just a moment. Discern realities. You roll your 2d6. Let's talk about that in just a moment. You roll your 2d6, you add your modifier, and then boom, you can ask a certain number of questions of me, the game master, and based on your success level, I'll be able to answer those questions, whichever ones you choose. You can aid or interfere, leveraging your bond with another character. And those are your basic moves. Now, as a starting character, you can choose, you can have other starting moves that go along with it. So like, for instance, the Bard. I love this, a port in the storm. When you return to a civilized settlement you were visited before, tell the GM when you were last there, and they'll tell you how it's changed since then. So you get some information about the place that you're at. So, starting moves, basic moves. Let's talk a little bit about what the mechanic is, the core mechanic. And the core mechanic, let's go back over to the game book here. The core mechanic is designed off of 3 success levels. You're going to be rolling 2d6 every time you have something challenging or something that you need to do that we want to have the dice enhance the fiction with. So 2d6, add your modifiers. A 10 plus, you get exactly what you want. You're going to be doing that thing. Let's use the example of me. I'm going to hack and slash this orc. So I'm going to do 2d6 plus my strength modifier. I roll a 10 plus, I win, I attack, I apply my damage modifier. A 7 to 9 is going to mean that I'm going to be able to attack, but there's going to be a complication. So I'll apply my damage modifier, but let's say I get my sword stuck in his armor, or somebody across the battlefield that I've been trying to avoid notices me. That could be an outside complication. It could be something I don't even know is about to happen. And the interesting thing with these complications is it doesn't necessarily have to be something where you get hurt. It could be something that just complicates the situation. Now you hit a 6 or less. You roll a 6 or less, modifiers added in, and you failed. Fortunately, I'm not going to be able to hit that orc with a sword. You know, it could be any number of things. Did I trip on something? Did I suddenly recognize this orc as the orc responsible for the slaughtering of my village? And that threw me off. I flew into a rage, or somebody else saw me and interfered. What is the reason that I missed? So that's where the fiction can be enhanced by the failure, because you're divining out why exactly did you mess up. Cool thing about this, even though you fail, we as people, we learn from our mistakes, hopefully, and sometimes we don't, I know myself. you get an experience point for that failure. So you're going to be able to say, okay, yeah, I missed this guy, the big bad noticed me, so I've got to be really careful, but I get an experience point. And you can see that as a lower tier player where you don't have a lot of modifiers, you may have more instances of these failures. Last game, the 3 players that I had, 2 of them earned 4 failures, so 4 experience points off of that, and another one earned 6. Didn't have a really good day with the dice. So, you gain experience from that. As you get in higher levels, you have more modifiers, more things that's going to attribute to your rolls. You'll have less failures, so less opportunities to earn XP that way. There's other ways to earn XP by satisfying bonds, and we'll talk about that right now. So let's jump back over to that Bard's character sheet. Here we go. So bonds. Right here, what makes these things really special are for each character class, you're going to have a particular style or grouping of bonds. You can create your own. They have some blank fields that you can actually leverage and do that. But for instance, let's take a look at the Bard's first bond here. This is not my first adventure with so-and-so. Right here and there, as you're creating characters, you are working in a group to share bonds. So for instance, let's say the Bard has been in our adventures with the cleric, and that cleric knows the Bard, and the Bard knows the cleric, and so they are able to help each other in certain instances. They can leverage that bond to either add one as a modifier to whatever role that applies, or they can interfere. Let's say the cleric has been trying to get the Bard to stay away from evil ways, and they want to get them onto the right side of the law, and they see them about to break into a house. Maybe the cleric interferes. They cast a light spell that causes all the shadows to disappear, and they have to run away, or the Bard has to run away. So great things that you can do with the bonds. You can leverage those to apply modifiers. You can also satisfy those bonds. So let's say they decide that they aren't going to adventure together anymore, or that this bond no longer applies. Maybe it graduates to a different level. Maybe the cleric decides that they want to convert the Bard to their particular faith. That would satisfy, if both agree that the first bond is satisfied, they earn XP from that, and then they create the new bond, and then that one applies going forward. So there's a lot of mechanics. So there's a few mechanics to this game that apply to any given situation within the fiction. But the thing I really love about the mechanics is that they don't interfere with the fiction. Yeah, again, the fiction is being fed by the mechanics instead of the fiction feeding the mechanics. So I hope you have enjoyed this intro to Dungeon World. There are a few other things we haven't covered, such as choosing gear, choosing alignment, that sort of thing. But those will occur during the character creation process. In fact, during session 1, it's almost a blend of a session 0, which means the session we create characters, and the actual adventure as it starts. Because we can actually do some of these things on the fly. We can build these things on the fly. So looking forward to gaming with everybody out there who signs up for this particular adventure. Again, it's a one-shot. It's going to be on July 15th, Friday. I'll be looking to start at roughly 5 p.m. Pacific. So I'm flexible. I can change that time a little bit. We'll be running anywhere from 3 to 4 hours. And if we have an opportunity, we may try and meet up prior to game night so that we can maybe work on characters or answer any questions that you have about the system. But check the show notes. There's going to be a few links down there that you'll be able to use. So I'm really looking forward to this. I hope you guys are too. I can't wait to wrap up signups and get the game started. But check us out on Facebook at in the Tavern. Visit our website. Find us on Twitter. All that information will be down there on the show notes. In the meantime, get out there and play games. Expand your horizons. Have fun around the table.